weekly Kootenai County Community Development meeting and or hearing. I am calling this meeting to order. Before we go any further, can I ask Dave Levine to lead us in the Pledge of Allegiance?
To the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Okay, and I should point out that we did start at precisely 9 a.m. Attending our commissioners Duncan, Brooks, and Filios. Do we have any potential conflicts of interest? Hearing none. I guess the first item then on our agenda is our public hearing, and this would be a potential action item, potential vote. So this is case number ZON 18-0015. It's a request by Kootenai County on behalf of the Robert G. Templin and Mary W. Templin Family Trust to assign a new zoning classification to parcel number 50 NW05W-11-3200, which consists of 0.614 acres. So who will lead us off here?
Mr. Chairman,
Greg McCallahan.
just a quick opening remark, and then Amy Helen will carry the ball for us because she's done all the necessary work. But I wanted to mention that this is a unique circumstance where the county has not actually zoned property that should have been zoned since we have had zoning regulations. The reason for that is if municipality, whether a county or a city, has zoning regulations, all land must be zoned. Otherwise, there's an argument that anything goes on property that's not zoned. And so that's the starting point for why we need to do this. I have no idea how this has slipped through the cracks for 40 plus years, but presumably because as Amy will show you, it's isolated and in the middle of the river.
Okay.
So I hope that gives you context.
Yes, sir. Amy, go right ahead.
Right. Amy Glenn, Planner for Community Development, for the record. Good morning, Board.
Good morning.
Here's just the project information. Kootenai County is the applicant in this case. The subject parcel is indicated by the star. It is south of the city of Post Falls, north of Riverview Drive, and just about a half-mile east of Spokane Street, where Spokane Street crosses the river in Post Falls. Here's the subject parcel. The acreage given is obtained from the assessor's office, and it's 0.614 acres, 26,745 square feet. As you can show, the only way to access the parcel would be by water. Just to give you some background, staff was curious to as how this parcel was never assigned a zone. We looked at some historic zoning maps. That's what you see on the left there. It was never drawn, and we believe that was why it wasn't carried forward when we went digital. You can see it from the maps. It is an island there, so we believe that's part of the reason it hasn't been assigned a zone, and it's existed like that for some time, so it's just never brought to our attention until the public inquired about it.
Okay.
Here are some photos of the island. The top two photos were taken from Google Maps. The bottom three photos were taken direct from the assessor's office. Parcels along the south side of the river are zoned agricultural suburban. This allows for residential and small-scale agricultural uses. This island, based on its creation, actually would be considered a conforming parcel under the agricultural suburban zoning code. Contrary to not being assigned a zoning designation, it does have a comprehensive plan designation, which is shoreline. The goals of shoreline guard against water quality degradation, reduce impervious surface in development, and support setbacks from shorelines and surface water. We did reach out to agencies. We did confirm with the city of Post Falls that it is in fact in our jurisdiction. They had no concern. The fire district approved of the request. Idaho Department of Environmental Quality provided their standard letter for future development. Panhandle Health had no concerns. The Idaho Department of Land did give us some background. The property owners did apply for a dock permit last August. It was denied due to lack of littoral ownership. And our zoning classification would not interfere or sway that determination. It would still be a denial. We did receive one public comment in opposition. The concerns were safety, buildability, dock permitting, and acreage. As David had mentioned, our staff response is that state law mandates that a zone classification be assigned. The owner is not proposing development at this time. It was brought to our attention by inquiry. If it were to be developed, building code and land use code would strictly be addressed for this parcel.
And it's unlikely that you could put any sort of septic field there, so it's unlikely any home or structure would be built.
Okay.
Staff recommends agricultural suburban zoning, similar to the south of Spokane River. It's compatible with the surrounding area. It also allows for less density than restricted residential would. This was brought before the hearing examiner on August 15th, 2019. The recommendation was also agricultural suburban. It is consistent with the comprehensive plan, and it is appropriate and warranted.
Okay.
I stand for any questions you have.
Questions for Amy?
Yes.
Yep.
Can you go back to any one of the maps and show me where the owner, so does the owner actually live?
No, it's Templin, it's a family trust. As far as I understand, the Templins had owned a great amount of land in the past. This might just be left over, but they don't own any land along the waterfront at this time, or close near this island.
Okay, so that island is just
Yeah.
it?
Yeah.
Bill, questions?
Well, one more.
Go ahead.
Right now, with the lack of zoning, can they just put up a structure because there's no?
Arguably.
I don't think that's what they,
It's more worrisome the way it is than if you
Yeah.
put a zoning category on it.
nobody's proposed anything like
Right.
that at this time.
And again, I'd be flabbergasted that you could actually meet setbacks, get a septic field, make it work in a way that any real structure is gonna be there.
Mhm.
And setbacks will be difficult, distance from shoreline, not to mention portions of the parcel are underwater during certain times of the year.
But that's again the reason to have
Yeah,
zoning, is that right now you can go put up anything and say we're exempt.
Right, and the level of water there varies 6 to 7 feet.
Okay.
All righty. Bill, questions?
No,
I have none. I think what we'll do is just, we have one comment, and that is from Kim Morris. I presume you are?
Yes, I wrote that I wanted to comment.
No, you said you do not wish to speak, but you're certainly welcome to.
Oh, I live across the river, and we paddleboard around those islands. And one of the rumors was that Templins wanted to put up a dock and have like a paddle up or boat up bar. And that was a rumor, like I heard from my neighbor. I don't know if it's true or not, but the zoning makes sense if that could be more of a prohibitive thing. And it's probably just a rumor.
I suspect you're right.
Sounds like fun, but
oh, so you were in favor of the bar?
no,
Oh.
I have my own bar.
Okay. Any other questions for Ms. Morris? Are you okay then?
Yes, totally. I didn't think I was going to speak.
Okay, that's okay.
So, seeing as there are no more comments, yes, is there a motion to end public testimony and enter into deliberations?
Yes, I move that we end public testimony and enter into deliberations.
I second the motion.
Bill Brooks,
Aye.
Commissioner Duncan.
Aye.
Chairman Philios.
Aye. Entering into deliberations, thoughts, concerns, anything?
No.
I'm fine with it being proposed.
So am I.
Planning has done their usual excellent job.
Motion.
Thanks.
I move that we approve case number ZON 18-0015.
I second the motion.
Bill Brooks,
Aye.
Commissioner Duncan.
Aye.
Chairman Philios.
Aye. Case number ZON 18-0015 is approved. That concludes the public hearing segment of our meeting this morning. Okay then, so moving on to what is item 6 on our agenda, which is deliberations. This is an action item. This is a continuation of case number ORA 18-0003 regarding an ordinance of Kootenai County, Idaho, political subdivision of the state of Idaho, and I'm not gonna read the rest, but this deals with, since it's approximately 3 pages, omnibus 3 amendments. We took public testimony earlier, a few weeks ago, and so today we're meeting for deliberations. And by that, we mean that this is strictly a discussion among and between the Board of County Commissioners, and we can certainly ask staff any questions that we might have in process. So any thoughts? Who would like to lead us off? Yeah, go right ahead. Bill, Leslie?
Well, I've had a couple of people contact me about 2 items that were particularly raised questions.
Go ahead.
And one was the requirement for hydrological, I don't know, certificates or
Yes,
studies
study.
on smaller acreage.
It's actually the same requirement we have today, with the only difference that instead of it being a professional engineer, it'd be a geologist with hydrological experience.
Does that cost more money?
Presumably not. The
Okay.
degrees are
Okay.
equivalent, and the state registrations are equivalent, so I don't see why it would unless it's a market thing.
Okay, and that answers that. The other one was the whole thing. I listened to the members, and one of the members was particularly concerned about helicopters landing in her backyard.
Well, this actually reverses that.
Okay, tell me about that.
Arguably today, a helicopter can land anywhere. The FAA allows the pilot the discretion to decide where it's proper to land. We don't have any regulations to get to it in any way. This expressly states where helipads may be located in certain zoning districts, commercial, industrial, and not in others.
Now, does it, I'm not intimately familiar with, but I know something about helicopters. They can land on a pretty small footprint of land.
Right.
Does it restrict in any way how big the piece of land has to be to put down?
Not at the moment. That was something you may recall the Plan Commission had talked about, and that's why there was a split vote on the Plan Commission. 3 of the planning commissioners would like there to be a minimum lot size, some dimensions set back from property lines, those kinds of things. At the Plan Commission discussion, the staff suggested that most of our commercial and industrial properties are significantly large and already have the sorts of land uses that create an impact equal to or greater than a helicopter landing. So it's not a big deal. But if you decide that you want those kinds of setbacks and things to be reconsidered, we could certainly do that.
Does it in any way restrict the frequency or time of operation?
Not yet. Nothing in this regulation would go there.
Would that be appropriate?
It's certainly one we can consider. It's not unusual for codes to try and get to that sort of thing, but I will tell you, you will see helicopters landing here at the hospital all day and night. That makes perfect sense at a hospital.
It does.
In other locations, not so much. That's why some municipalities have
Address that.
conditional use regulations for those kinds of things. But I think what's different between the county and the city is we don't have a hospital where people are landing in the unincorporated county. It's a rare thing for a private pilot to marshal up their multi-million-dollar helicopter and fly in and out.
That's one helicopter.
Yes. And so this is really a finessing of our regulations to get to an issue that we don't address at the moment. It doesn't happen much. If you'd like us to go back and look at some more, we can.
The question is though, if it does become a problem, can it then be addressed
Of course.
at any time?
Yeah, that's true with any code.
Okay, well,
Yeah.
I just want to be clear on the record,
Sure.
that we're not locked in for 3 years.
Absolutely. No, you always have flexibility, especially in your land use development code,
Okay.
to address matters at any time.
Those are my only questions.
Okay. Leslie, thoughts?
A couple different thoughts. I don't think we should have necessarily things in here that if we're not going to enforce, then I don't think we should have codes that we don't enforce. Does that make sense? If we have a code, we should enforce it, we should be able to enforce it. That being said, ownership is also the right to control, the right of exclusion, right of enjoyment, right of disposition. Yeah. So I really take exception to the whole RV timeframe. I think that it puts undue hardship on property owners or families who are going through hard times, and this is their only means of habitation. And so I don't think that we should put a time frame on it. I will be bringing forth multiple changes to the land use code eventually, and doing away with the restriction on RVs would be one, but just addressing omnibus itself, I would like to not have a time frame put on there. And I think I have a couple other questions as far as with the new change on the 200 versus 400 foot storage units before a primary thing. Most cargo containers are under 400 square feet, so is this going to, will that allow them as well, or no?
They're carved out separately in the code, cargo containers are. They have their own threshold. This, by way of backup and context, opens the door for something that's not even allowed at the moment. So it's, again, a liberalizing of the codes. Okay.
I would just like to see the liberalizing of the codes include cargo containers.
In any particular way?
Well, just the fact that if it meets it's double the setbacks, it's for people, you know, because they have those pods now too, where people put all their stuff in it, they come set it down, and that's their storage container while they're building.
Is that right now, we just require a special notice for cargo containers? Are you suggesting there ought to be a carve out for, if you can do certain things, you don't need a special notice?
Yeah, that's what I would suggest.
Do you have a
but-
second?
Sure.
Because if we could no, I mean, do you have a second here? Because we could backtrack with the plan commission and work it through that way.
Well, I don't want to, some of these changes are good and beneficial, and so if I can bring them forward
Right,
at another time
of course.
and address it then. But it was more kind of like a question.
Okay, yeah, sure.
You know, because I don't want to prevent this from going forward.
I get it. Does that answer your question?
Yes,
Okay.
yes, that does. So I can bring that forward later.
Okay.
But the RV thing, if I were to have a second and that were to be struck, is that a material change? Would it need to go back before a hearing?
That's Pat's call.
Would you be considering, you know, just taking off the restriction on the RV, or just the time frame that was added?
Well,
You could-
the restriction eventually, however,
For
It would
now.
just be the time
it
frame.
would be the time frame for omnibus purposes, right? Am I
I think
reading that
if you just
correctly?
remove the time frame, I don't think that would be a material change. If you remove the restriction altogether, that
Yes.
arguably could be.
Okay. Okay, and sadly, I don't know where it is in my paperwork.
Yeah, that's what I'm looking for now.
84.401.
Yep.
Okay, yeah, that would be on page 25.
Okay, yeah, it's even in the grid. It says, providing that temporary or intermittent use of a recreational vehicle shall be limited to 90 days, followed by at least 30 days of non-use, and shall not exceed 180 days in a calendar year.
Yeah.
And just, I'm sorry, go ahead, Dave.
Mr. Chairman, may I?
Yeah,
Again, this suggestion for a time frame comes to you on the heels of the complaints you have heard in here from people that don't like the RVs and want us to have some known limits so we can deal with it.
Well, I don't like starter mansions, and yet I'm getting 25 of them at my
I'm not
back door.
taking sides, I'm just
I know, I'm
suggesting
just saying that
background.
we will never make
Right.
everybody happy. But to
Right.
me, this directly flies in the face of, is this your property or is it not your
Okay.
property? Can you live on your
Understood.
property in a manner that is working for your family,
Right.
or can you not? And to have neighbors, I don't see how somebody living on their property in a RV can negatively affect a neighbor. Okay, sight, visual, yeah, but we don't have anything in the code for that, and I would never support that. One thing. Number two, I'm not concerned about property values, because that is not the role of government to protect property values, okay? Health and safety, yes, but how is a couple living in their motorhome affecting the health and safety of their neighbors?
May I answer the
Yeah, go
question?
ahead.
Part of the equation is the RVs don't typically have a place to dump. We get complaints that people are urinating or defecating and without a septic field, or dumping the RV on raw sewage on the ground.
Right, which is
That's part
already
of the
against the
issue.
law, which is already against the
Yeah,
law,
but
which
we
is a-
can't enforce that.
Right, but
That's
Panhandle Health
Health,
can.
and they don't have a person that does that.
Okay, so then, once again, I go back to the fact that it's not enforceable anyway.
Well, it is by zoning.
Right, but I just have a problem
Okay.
Actually,
saying,
sorry, didn't mean to interrupt, but actually our current regulation does require the RV to be hooked into a sewage disposal system.
It's part of the
Or be
process.
self-contained.
great,
So we could we actually
We
could.
can enforce that piece of it
Yeah.
through zoning code.
right,
Right.
but I guarantee you have tons of
But
properties.
if they're out there with, which is often the case, we get pulled in, there is no hookup for sewage, and they're exceeding the time frame, which we have to argue is intermittent. That's where the hole we're trying to plug.
Right, which I would come back and argue that case anyway. So, that's where I'm at.
I'm enjoying this.
Yeah, so like I said, I have other changes to bring forth, I don't wanna hold
Sure.
up on the best three.
Got it.
But I am against this change, because right now intermittent use, is something that we can, have a little bit more leniency towards, while people, are getting their act together. I mean, I just have personal experience where friends of ours, and I think I brought this up with David before,
Right.
where they had to live in their RV. They thought it was gonna be less than a year, they were gonna build their house, he lost their job, it saved their lives, they were able to, take their RV, get it dumped. Actually, I think they'd already started on the septic, so they might have just had a septic that went.
Lucky them.
Yeah, exactly, and then they ended up building, and 4 years later, they have a great place. Their RV is still there, they don't live in it anymore, but, mom and dad come, mom and dad stay in there, for 2 weeks or whatever. So I just have a problem telling people, yes, you bought this land belongs to you, but wait a minute, you can't actually live on your land if you can't afford a certain quality or style of home.
Bill? Thoughts?
I've just heard, I got a 2-page letter from one of the members of the planning commission that was so over the top, outrageous, and every other word was property rights and primacy, and Benjamin Franklin said, and C.S. Lewis said, and I'm just not interested in going there.
Is that it?
Yeah.
Oh. Yes.
Mr. Chairman, just to clear the air, at your public hearing, I had suggested that the staff wanted the minor subdivision geology part added back in. It's actually expressly written into the ordinance in your electronic file the way Pat had originally done it. The Plan Commission strike-through is not in there. So if you're inclined to go with the staff recommendation, all you have to do is move to approve that, subject to any other changes you as a board. Okay.
No, go ahead.
So I understand that change, and once again, I probably take exception to the fact that if it's a minor subdivision and we're requiring all of this stuff, can it be scientifically proven? Are they getting this judgment from this now hydrologist is it accurate? Is it good? Is it beneficial? Is it worth return on investment? I guess that would be my question. Does science support our regulation of having these people get this information? So changing it from this to a this,
Professional engineer to
To
a
a
geologist
yes.
with hydrology experience.
yes. I don't necessarily have a problem with that. I have a problem with requiring it in the first place, but once again, that's not an omnibus thing that I, you know, I'll bring it up later.
Do you want me to respond, or you?
No, no,
got
go
a
ahead, if you-
Rhetorical statement.
Well, I guess, let me talk about it a little bit further then. In your opinion, what was the problem? They figured it would cost more to make that change, or
No,
what was the argument for that?
water quantity. You were going to have a public hearing next week on that
Yes.
very issue.
Right.
Those neighbors, I dare say 30 or more of them you will hear from, are adamant that their water supply is being depleted. They think it's because we allow too many subdivisions. That's your issues for that hearing.
Sure.
What we've tried to address is the snapshot in time we take to try and help people get an idea of whether subdivisions are creating lots of reasonable utility. There is, in my view, an unmistakable difference between a professional engineer and a geologist with hydrology experience, because I know from my own registration as a landscape architect, professional engineers don't have to know anything about water,
Sure.
especially underground water. That's at the purview of geologists, and especially ones that know about hydrology. And so this was our attempt to try and get a better qualified person to give us a better snapshot in time when we do minor subdivisions.
So I guess once again, I'm not following why the planning commission didn't want the change.
They thought it related to money. As you heard me express before, I can't conceive of how it could be significantly different,
Right.
given that these professionally degreed credentialed people by the state have roughly equivalent backgrounds in education.
I'm almost wondering if DEQ would be able to provide this kind of service. Because
No.
they have hydrologists on staff.
Well, we're not gonna be able to hire a DEQ staff to do this kind of work. We might work up an intergovernmental agreement.
Right.
They would probably, presumably, be looking for some sort of quid pro quo for that.
Right. Okay. Well, then that would probably be, I mean, if you're gonna require it for a purpose, then I guess that makes sense to require somebody who's educated in that particular field. So I don't necessarily have a problem with making that particular change. If we already require that they have to prove there's quantity of water.
Right.
So then I guess, with exception to the RV, I'm fine with what has been presented to us without the recommendation in
Right.
that one area of the planning commission.
Understood.
Okay. Okay, to help me out here, in the highlights of the changes, I'm looking for the one that we just completed the discussion on, which was requiring the hydrological study on 4 acres, on a minor sub.
You won't find it expressly in the highlights, you
Oh.
find it in 8.6.302B9 of the actual ordinance. I mean, it talks
Oh,
about
I'd
it in
have
the
to go to the
highlights,
actual
but it doesn't
ordinance.
show you the language.
Okay,
The language is B9 under 8.6.302.
oh, here it is, in fact, I marked it, I'm looking at it right now. Before I get into that, a more general question, because I think Leslie touched on something that it's sort of part of the discussion, it's always part of the discussion when we get into the question of property rights. And I think this is maybe more of a question for Pat. When the question of value comes up in the general discussion of property rights, can you weigh in on that? I mean, I know, and when I say I know, because of my license credentials, one of them being as an appraiser, that if I'm looking at a property and there's an RV next door, that I don't have a problem with people moving into an RV and needing time and having to build it. But all that aside, there is a potential impact to value, okay? is that a if I'm asking this question correctly, Pat, a consideration in the whole topic of land use when you get into the question of value and impact?
I don't think value has a
Role?
specific, well, I don't think value, in and of itself has any consideration in determining whether to adopt X regulation or repeal Y regulation, or, consider, whether to grant or deny a CUP for that matter,
Right.
as examples. Things that do have to do with health, safety, general welfare, nuisances, protection of natural resources, etc., may indirectly affect values of both subject property and neighboring properties. But I don't think that how it affects values
Is a question.
is a proper concern, because all zoning regulations affect property values in one way or another.
Sure.
And it's essentially a monetized, expression of the sum of the property rights you get with that property,
Right.
so.
Yeah, and I don't, back to that discussion, I don't have an issue with a single RV. And not necessarily with the time frame, but I'd have to, back to Leslie's point, I'd have to look at that more carefully.
By the way, just let the board know that time frame would not
Yes.
apply to people like living in an RV while their house is under construction. That's
Okay,
already allowed. That's
okay.
already
It's
allowed.
already allowed in a separate section.
So
Okay,
basically,
thank
just
you for
talking
pointing
about,
that out.
RVs, they're on property where there's not construction of
And it's really the claim of a nuisance that we're hearing from neighbors that we need this regulation to get at.
Right, we get, we get those complaints on the one hand, of course, we have Leslie's considerations that she's articulated on the other, and so it's the, job of the board, the purview of the board to determine how you want to address that.
This is what we
Or
dealt
whether
with,
you want to address that.
this is what we dealt with the RVs down.
Coeur d'Alene Lake Drive.
Complained bitterly that
That's
a number
cool.
of neighbors were upset.
Right.
But the guy had set up a little Airbnb, parking RVs all over the place. And that's a very simplistic view of it, but it wasn't one resident, it wasn't two, it wasn't three, there was a number of them. And they didn't
Once
have,
again, they were complaining about their view. It looked ugly
They-
when they drove by. It
that
looked the other
too,
way.
it was also about sanitation and
Right.
traffic and a number of other things that impact the quality of life, okay? And when I was at a meeting
I was just gonna ask you.
that I accidentally walked into of the John Birch Society the other night, a guy up in northern, I'm not gonna name his name because he should be ashamed, but he walked up and started jabbing his finger in my chest, saying it's not anybody's business how many RVs I put on my property. And I said, well, is it okay if your neighbor puts 52 on your 5
How big was
acre?
his property?
Huh?
How big was his
I
property?
didn't make any
I
difference.
thought he said he had 5 acres.
5 acres, but I said, if it's a 5 acre plot next door, can your neighbor put up 52? And he goes, absolutely not. And I said, why not? It's his or her property, they should be able to do whatever they please, according to you. And the discussion ended.
But once again, if you're talking about running a commercial business, now you have a whole set of regulations. I'm not talking about that.
Nobody's talking about a commercial. I'm talking about people parking RVs willy-nilly on a 5 acre parcel. He wants to decide how many his neighbor can have, but he doesn't want anybody deciding how many he can have. That seems to be a real myopic view of people with these property rights arguments.
Just against the time frame.
Maybe, maybe
No, go ahead, Pat.
maybe the chairman could, determine whether, either yourself or Commissioner Brooks would be agreeable with Commissioner Duncan's proposal to remove that, the timeframe on that, before we actually go to a vote on omnibus 3 as a whole.
I'm sympathetic to people who are in process of construction. I have had friends and people that I know in Alaska with 3 children living in a container, cargo container, for a year while they built their own house because they couldn't afford to have a builder build it. Through the Alaska winter with a barrel stove in there, 3 kids and 2 adults. and no sanitary anything. It was out in the woods. And had they not had the ability to do that by zone and by code, they would not have had their house. They would not have. They would have been, for all intents and purposes, homeless. But you know what? This is not Alaska. If you want that kind of zoning or lack thereof, go there.
Well, and just for clarity, we can allow an RV to be used for a home today.
Yes,
I
yes,
In our
yes,
current
that's fine.
regs.
I have no problem with that.
Okay, this is what we're arguing about, if I may use that term, is only about the circumstance that where we have to deal with what's currently temporary and intermittent. This takes it out of that definition of Webster's and puts it into a known timeframe.
Right.
Okay.
Okay, so just to keep it on track, and I think Leslie makes an interesting point. We could, I think what you said was we could take this up later, am I correct? And I'm fine with that. For now, I'd leave it alone.
Well, I'm not fine with leaving it alone for now,
Oh,
because it's
okay.
not going to prevent us from approving Omnibus 3 today. Just taking that one section out, and then further addressing the other issues that I brought up. But just for Omnibus,
Okay, so let's look at that one more time. Let's read it so that we're all on, it's 8.4.401, and I'm on the highlights. Providing that temporary or intermittent use of a recreational vehicle shall be limited to 90 days, followed by at least 30 days of non-use, and shall not exceed 180 days in a calendar year. So you would like that stricken?
yes, and then I'll go back and, but that's a whole different presentation later. One of the other issues that I have is, yes, okay, if you are going to construct your home, but what happens if you now are not going to construct a home and now this is your residence?
There you go.
Until, in perpetuity, until something else changes. So that's kind of where I have that other issue too. And what happens if my mom, who's a widow, wants to come up and live here as a snowbird? She can't do it without moving everything for 30 days and come and being off my property. So also, it also restricts that. If she wants to live here, March through November, that restricts that particular thing.
Guess what? It's a good point. Bill?
I can make every kind of argument, theoretical here and there and that and the other, for or against any particular part of this code. And that's not gonna sway my vote. I would vote we pass this thing and move on. And if Commissioner Duncan wants to bring back something later, do so. But the helicopter thing, we could sit here all morning and discuss helicopters. But it's gonna hold up this code, and I don't think that's a good idea. And I don't think codes are bad things. They can be bad things. They can be a good example of government overreach on unnecessary regulations and intrusion into private property rights. But I don't see that happening in Kootenai County. And if it ever does, I'll be the first to be screaming about it.
Okay, I think Leslie raises a good point. What if we do insert something in there? Because I understand the intent of the regulation, of the ordinance, excuse me. Regulation's a dirty word, right? So, and maybe just put in a restriction in terms of the number of RVs? I mean, by the way, I could be faced with this.
But which we have two though. We already have a restriction.
already have
We
one.
can only have 2 RVs on the whole.
Yeah, and in high yeah,
That's
this-
okay,
this would, also codify that, and, you could, in
Okay, so let me just go back because I
high
think,
density residential, and I think in restricted residential, you'd only be able to have one. In rural ag and ag sub, you'd be able to have up to 2.
okay, so to Leslie's earlier question, which I think is entirely appropriate, if her mom decides to move up and put an RV presumably on your property ad infinitum, are we okay? How are you zoned, rural?
Yep, I'm wrong.
Are we good?
And not, we would make sure Panhandle Health, all that, make all those different arrangements. But and I'm saying my mom isn't considering doing that. But anybody else is who, because we are coming into that generation where we're having all these baby boomers who now need, to to be cared for.
That's a new regulation.
That is a then
What you're
material,
asking for is a material change.
It's a
in my view,
material
Because right
change.
now today, RVs shall not be used as dwellings except as provided in this section.
Which I'm totally fine with bringing that forward in a whole nother issue. I just don't wanna put a time restriction on it right now until it takes us 3, 4, 6 months to get new regulations hammered out.
okay, so if we remove the time restriction, and I think this has already been answered, but I wanna make sure it's clear, is there a restriction on the number of RVs?
Yes.
Yes, there would still be.
Okay, right off the bat, what is it in restricted residential, is it one?
Actually, it's 2 in restricted residential, I just looked at it. The only one that's restricted to 1 is high-density residential.
Okay, so now if we go up to ag suburban or.
It's still 2.
It's still 2 rural?
It's still 2. If you have 3 or more, then you have to apply for a CUP for an RV park.
You know what? I'm with Leslie on this one. Get it out. Take out the time restriction.
So we're just striking A under 84401.
Can we have
No.
okay, never mind.
You
We'll
have-
just,
you have two.
we'll include that in the motion.
Yeah,
the
that's
final
correct.
motion.
Yeah, somebody document this, so
Yeah,
it's all
I got it.
screwed up over here.
Just,
I
you
got
know,
it.
just remove, remove, without the changes to 84401.
Okay.
Because then it would basically just revert to what we have now.
Okay, okay, got it. Touching, going back to the minor subdivision and the hydrological study, what's currently recommended?
It's actually in your regs the way we would like it. So you don't have to do anything. The 9B, B9 is written the way we like it, which is, it includes,
We would just include that in minor subdivisions and condos.
and it's in here that way now.
That it is
Under
required for minor
8.6.302.
subdivisions.
Oh,
I thought you said it was stricken.
No,
Oh,
the plan
no,
commission
no.
wanted
There-
it stricken,
there is,
Okay,
yeah.
I'm sorry.
but the actual ordinance in front of you on your electronic file has the language I want. It's what the plan commission didn't want.
Okay, so what was the language you wanted? What section are we in?
8.6.302B9.
Okay, I'm looking at it here. So requiring
It's on
groundwater.
page 49.
Yeah, it is on here. Requiring groundwater quality reports for major sub and minor subdivisions and condos to be performed by a professional geologist, and requiring a detailed hydrological analysis of the proposed subdivision. It's not over the prairie, okay?
So
Over the aquifer, actually, and there are wells within 1/2 mile of the subdivision or condo site, or whenever new or existing wells may negatively affect the quantity of water. I'm fine.
So that's a synopsis. The actual language is
Go
on
ahead.
page 49 of the ordinance,
So then
underscored.
I do have a further question on
Yeah.
that,
Yeah, go ahead.
because, what it says in our sheet here, that keep and discuss additional wording to address actual water volumes and rate of flow, change the term prove to demonstrate the likelihood. Has that been done?
Yes.
Yes,
Okay,
if you look at that underscored language,
right,
it captures that.
Are we okay then?
yes.
Okay.
Except I just noticed a typographical error I'll have to fix. But yeah,
Well, you have discretion to fix that.
right. Yeah, no, it'll get fixed before, so.
We go to,
Are we all right? You okay?
Yep.
Bill? Okay. I think I only have one other item. And I can't quote my comments, not appropriate in a public forum. 8.4.603. On the highlights.
Which,
the landscape
It's-
standard?
8.6 point,
No, 8.4.603, I think
It's
it's,
starting on page 20, at the bottom of 25,
there you go, you got it right there.
continuing on
There
to
you go.
26 and 27.
The question that I have here, clarifying landscaping standards and providing facilities for display, et cetera, may display and store those items outdoors without visual screening and within the required front yard setback. Okay, so when I look at the justification, you're saying to make landscaping standards less onerous by scaling them to what is truly appropriate for the most rural nature. Again, now if this go ahead.
If you look on page 26 and 27 of the electronic version,
Yeah, go ahead.
it gives you better context.
Okay.
There's really two things going on.
Go
Under
ahead.
C1, it makes it clear that if we're gonna require these trees, they're gonna be on the street side of things, so people that it affects actually see it. That's a no-brainer, should have been in there for 40 years.
Okay.
At page 27 under F is where it lightens the load, if you will, for a commercial property that has an automobile dealership.
Right, commercial property is the key.
So along 95, where we have 4 or 5 of them, they no longer have to do the fairly rigid landscaping we now require. Instead, there's a provision that gives them a way out.
Okay. What section was that again, David?
8.4.603 C and F,
Page 27.
26 and 27.
Actually, you can see through F.
And then you scroll down to F.
Oh, yeah, thank you, C subparagraph F.
Okay. Okay, I'm fine with that. My concern is in residential areas. Um, Hang on a minute
Maybe what would help you
here. Yeah, okay,
is
so,
that under C1, it's a clarification that the trees in the residential area are where they serve a useful purpose,
which would be at the front of the lot,
and on the street side.
okay?
That has nothing to do with F, which lightens the load for automobile distributor.
And I'm fine with that.
Okay.
My concern is where someone has a host of vehicles or whatever on his or her lot, and there's no screening and no buffer to the road.
Well, that would be F.
Well,
No,
In
that's a
part.
commercial,
Talking
I'm
about
talking
not-
residential.
not-
Yes, I'm
commercial.
talking strictly residential.
Well,
Well,
that's
that-
not actually addressed in here.
that may, that may constitute a code violation. If they're,
If
you know,
it's
if you have more than 2 that are inoperable and are just.
unlicensed and inoperable.
Right.
Okay, so we're
That's a
strictly,
different
okay,
issue.
so we're strictly addressing commercial here.
Yes.
And if you
Oh,
got,
right,
if
fine.
you got 10
Good.
licensed operable vehicles, that's allowed,
Right. Right.
In a residential.
Uh-huh.
right? Yeah.
Okay.
As long as they're licensed and
That's a
operable.
different one, yeah.
My friend has a Ford collection, it's so fun to go see.
I'm done,
Okay.
I'm done. The only one I think, correct me if I'm wrong, that we're making a change to is 8.4.401, which deals with the RVs.
Right.
Yes.
Right,
And if I'm not mistaken, we are removing the time restriction.
right.
So Pat, would a motion that simply indicated that, citing the relevant section, be sufficient?
On that one, and then you would also want to, otherwise as presented by staff.
There you go.
For the balance, for the
Yeah,
rest of it?
Yes.
Okay. Do you want to make any comments before?
I think community development has done a great job here. I don't think you all have overreached or beat up the population or stuck the little nasty fingers of government in anybody's business at this point. Now, if you do, we'll have a problem. That's true.
Well, if we do, I'd have a problem.
Okay, well,
There you
that's
go.
good too. But what bothers me is the overarching philosophical argument. What I do on my property is my business, and nobody else's business but my business. Until my neighbor does something I don't want, then I want a law. I want an ordinance, I want a setback, I want a whatever. So,
Which happens?
huh?
Which happens?
It happens all the time. It's inconsistent. It's inconsistent. But they quote the founding fathers and go on and on and on. Life, liberty, and property. I got news. It says life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. You know why it doesn't say life, liberty, and property? Because at that time, slaves were property. And if you had put life, liberty, and property in there, the southern states would have said, great, you've got slavery enshrined here. But it's okay to twist that phrase when it's useful. Now, John Locke is the one that said life, liberty, and property. But I'm sorry, he didn't write our founding documents. There's a whole history to this.
Now, the 14th Amendment does protect life, liberty, and
I'm not
property
talking about...
against deprivation without due
Without
process of law, but that was
compensation.
after the slaves were freed by
Right,
the 13th.
right. But I'm not talking about that. I'm talking about what is quoted back to me and thrown up every time that we come up with some, what I consider to be reasonable, codes. And
But once again, reasonable is in the eye of the beholder.
that's exactly right. Exactly right. So we should have no codes. Is that what you're saying? No codes.
No.
No codes. You believe in that? We should have no rules, no regulations, no codes, just whatever the hell people want to do it because it's your property, right? Is that what you're saying?
That's not what I'm saying.
Okay. So you are in favor of codes, rules, and regulations for property?
When they deal with health and safety, absolutely. When they deal with visual, nope, not so much. When they deal with essentially taking somebody's ability to use their property the way they see fit, then yes, I do.
Okay.
And most reasonable people who believe in what the founding fathers intended are nice to their neighbors.
Let's all be nice. We don't need codes.
Well, that's Benjamin Franklin said that.
Well,
It's a
Ben-
republic if you can keep it.
Ben,
It's for
oh God,
religious
I've
and
heard that
moral.
so many times I'm ready to puke.
Okay.
I'm sorry,
So
that's
let me,
just,
let me ask, I think we're being very
I'm
philosophical,
ready
but
for
on a practical basis. No, but on a practical level, okay, so for example, if somebody wants to, so you're in a residential zone, for the sake of argument, let's call it rural 5-acre minimum. So an individual wants to put, back to Bill's earlier point, I don't know, 7 or 8 RVs and rent them out.
Is that normal? Is that reasonable? Is that what most people do?
do you do that?
No, but can I speak after
No,
this?
No, you can't, I'm
Fortunately, you
sorry.
can't.
That's all right.
Well,
But we do have public comment at the end, so we'll let you
Okay.
speak, how's that? No, go ahead.
so to me, that is unreasonable. We have codes against that to say you can't do that. But what I'm talking about, I'm not talking about those extreme situations because we can go extreme all day long. I'm just talking about the person who works their fingers to the bone to order to afford their property. And we're saying that we can't have a cargo container on there. You can't have, you can't live in your RV. You can't do some of these more restrictive things that are more normal, not, over the top. I mean, we can go extreme all day long. I mean, my neighbor can put up a 4-story mansion that is just 25 feet back from their whole,
The setback.
10-acre parcel, right? And have that giant monster next door to me. That's fine. That's fine. Okay, is it awkward? Is it unusual? Am I gonna get tons of comments from everybody who comes by? Sure. But that's their deal. But yet, I don't know that our code would even allow that. No, unless they had sprinklers and
That's a
had
whole
a
nother
land
matter,
you
yeah.
pad and all kinds of stuff.
It's an
But we
interesting.
can have this debate all day long. I'm just trying to be reasonable for the reasonable person who has these circumstances that I don't necessarily think that we should be limiting because a neighbor is unhappy with the way their neighbor's property looks.
Okay. Yeah, I'll just make a final comment here. And these are interesting discussions, and they're gonna be ongoing. But if I hearken back to the study that was done in the early 2000s, which was the Keziah-Watkins study, which some people have, rebuffed, but from what I could tell, no good reason, and there's not been another one. and 1,400 residents participated, and there were a few things that came out of that study, and I happened to be the person that asked the ladies, the two ladies, Mrs. Keziah and Watkins, what are the conclusions? And one of them was that they wanted to preserve the rural character of Kootenai County. Okay, fine. So when you do that, now fast forward to the ULUC, when we went through that whole gut-wrenching exercise, there were those who said, one zone in the county. Really? So on my 5-acre lot is my home. Here comes a surface mine next door. Let's throw a gas station on the other side. And all in the name of property rights.
Mhm.
That to me, to hearken to Les, that's an extreme. Because that's saying, I really don't believe in zoning, and I really don't want land use code. I reject that argument, and I think most people would, especially the conclusion that says preserve the rural character. But to your point, how far do we go? Where does government overreach? But I just thought I'd bring that out. In any case,
Well, to the
Go
point of a
ahead.
gas station, so if you didn't have zoning, the gas station, A, would go out of business because the residents wouldn't support it, or B, it'd be successful because the residents supported it. So, you know, we can just go back and forth on these discussions all the time. There are places across the country that don't have zoning, they're just operating just fine. They don't have, you know, these different conflicts, and if they do, they eventually work themselves out. And I'm not saying don't go to any zoning here. I think people move here with an expectation of being in certain areas. And that's fine. I'm just saying that, you know, some of these things to me are just a little bit overreaching for some aspect of our population.
okay,
So I appreciate you seeing that point, and I'm ready to make a motion.
okay. So let's end this discussion. Proceed.
Okay, I move that we approve case number ORA 18-0003, the Omnibus 3 as presented by staff, with the exception of removing 8.4.401, letter A.
Okay.
Is that right, Pat?
Yeah, I would have said remove the change,
It's-
proposed changes to
Remove the-
8.4.401.
Then I will amend my motion to say remove the proposed changes to 8.4.401.
Okay, that works.
Okay.
I will second that eloquently made motion.
Okay.
Bill Brooks.
Aye.
Commissioner Duncan. Chairman Philios.
Aye. So,
Public-
omnibus number 3, well, yeah, we'll get to that. Omnibus case number OR 18-003 is approved as presented by staff, with the exception as noted in the motion made by Commissioner Duncan. And on that note, we can go to public comment. Go right ahead, Ken.
And don't say I don't have anything to say.
No.
I was about to, no. This is my first
No, go right ahead.
commissioners meeting, sorry. I grew up here and in between here and Spokane, and it's always been this beautiful natural place. But I moved to a city and only last year came back.
Where'd you move to?
I moved to Seattle,
Okay.
and they have a problem with RVs, both parking, visually blocking the view that people are paid for of the water, their water view. And there are campers up and down, and they're not just friends who are homeless or something like that. They're drug users who have their stuff out beyond their camper, their generators going all night, their, you know, drug deals happening, and
Whose property are they on?
they're on public property, but
Okay,
the
that's a whole
police.
different.
Okay, well, the police are, I mean,
Yeah,
they bring
that's the
crime
main
to
one, yeah.
neighborhoods,
Right.
some of these
Right, which is-
situations.
Yeah, I mean, it's a bigger issue than what I'm trying to
Okay,
address. I'm not
okay.
saying, hey, let's do away with it so we can have a drug.
Right, no,
we
no,
have a drug
I,
community.
no, I get it, I totally get it, but, at the same time, I can understand the neighbors not wanting to see RVs parked up and down blocking their views. So that's all I wanted to say, and I don't understand everything, but it's been fascinating.
Thank you for coming.
And
Okay.
all of your,
Did you enjoy this?
I did, I was like, well, maybe I should leave. No, this is getting good.
Okay.
Bring popcorn next time.
I will.
All right then. So seeing as I guess there is no further public comment, the time is precisely 10 a.m. and this meeting is adjourned. Thank you.
Until
we have
we start
a-
the signings.
We have a
Sure.
sign.
Oh, I'm sorry.
That's okay, we're out of the deliberations.
I'm sorry, that concludes, I stand
This is the
corrected.
boring part now.
Yeah, that's right. That
The
concludes
boring
the
part, the quiet part.
Okay, so that concluded the deliberations section of our meeting. We do have to proceed to a signing, which is a single item, ordinance number 545 for case number ORA 17-0002, which was upheld by the by the board on a public hearing September 11th of 2019, unanimously approved. Is there a motion?
I move that we execute the order of decision for ordinance number 545 for case number ORA 17-0002.
I second the motion.
Bill Brooks.
Aye.
Commissioner Duncan.
Aye.
Chairman Philios.
Aye. Proceeding with the signing.
Leslie, this is for the chairperson for the adoption. This has to be published, and it will become effective October 9th.
So that goes back to Kathy.
Thank you, commissioners.
Thank you.
Yes.
That's about 2 years' worth of work.
Yes, sir.
Most appreciated.
So then we did okay in 1 hour, didn't we? Or actually a little bit less. Thank you, everyone.